Welcome. I'm very happy to welcome Jacqueline Pitanguy from Brazil. And we'd love to hear a little bit about what you're doing now and what led you to that point.
Well, right now, I am still doing what I have been doing for the past 23 years. And this is, I run an organization, a non-governmental organization based in Rio de Janeiro called SEPIA. And we work mostly with violence and access to justice, health, sexual and reproductive rights, and with low-income community women in terms of, enhancing their leadership capacity, their citizenship rights. So within this broad programmatic lines, we develop a number of things. I always say women are like popos. We have many arms and many legs, and the same when we work. I mean, we do so many different things within that basic programmatic line. So SEPIA is still going on, and it's, I would say today, a reference women's rights NGO in Brazil.
I think, as I recall, SEPIA was founded specifically around the issue of violence against women. Is that true?
Yeah, well, SEPIA, it's interesting because before starting SEPIA, I was on a governmental position. I was on a cabinet position. We were on the democratization moment of our country on the late 80s, mid 80s. And by being on this National Council for Women's Rights, I understood the need to have very strong non-governmental organizations, very strong civil society organizations, in order to make advocacy and push the government in not only on a critical way towards government, but also proposing. So SEPIA, when we started SEPIA, it had this feature of being a very strong advocacy organization for women's rights. So we work within this broad frame of women's human rights and citizenship rights. And then we do have privilege the issue of violence and access to justice, but also similarly the issue of sexual and reproductive rights, which is a form of violence if a woman is deprived of. And always we have been working on an advocacy level also.
And has the work of SEPIA and other groups worked? In other words, has it had an effect in Brazil on government?
Certainly, yes. I would say that the women's movement in Brazil has had an effect, an important one. We started and we came as a political actor in the arena on the late 70s, but then on the 80s with the democratization process, we also started to get inside the government and doing public policies with a women's or gender perspective. We didn't use the word gender at that time. The words are, they are historical. But anyway, I think that our constitution, 1988 Constitution, reflects the impact of women's movements advocacy and the National Council for Women's Rights. It is really a constitution that assures women's rights. And so I would say that today in Brazil, in terms of a normative frame, we are quite advanced. And what we see now is the need to break this distance between laws and reality, between laws and life, and to guarantee the access, the real access to what is already written, so that it doesn't become only a rhetoric. And then you do have the categories that will make an interface and make this distance between laws and reality larger or shorter, and that's social class, that's race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, poverty. So there's a number of issues that kind of cut transversely and do interfere. So I like to talk about women in plural because we are a different category among ourselves.
I'd like to speak specifically, if we could, a little bit about violence against women, and whether in Brazil you and your colleagues have come to some conclusions about what really can be done effectively around what we might describe as an epidemic of violence against women around the world.
This issue of the epidemic of violence against women around the world, I think requires multiple answers because it is multi-layered, it is a very complex, multidimensional phenomenon. And in Brazil, I think we have had in 2006 an important achievement, which is a new legislation called the Law Maria da Penha, and it's named for a woman who became a paraplegic because her husband tried to murder her. And so this new legislation is specific on domestic violence and also establishes courts, special courts of justice, and to deal with the cases. So we do have now a frame, some principles that are very important. And yet this does not mean that violence will end because you have a law. But yes, women will now have a more strong vulnerability protection. They are more protected. They have some principles to which they can refer to. And so this was very important. But on the other hand, another issue that I think is very important when dealing with violence against women is the issue of invisibility and the lack of reliable statistics. And this is, you know, the lack of reliable statistics many times because first, they are not still considered a real crime by the police in general. Second, because statistics are not good on a specific country, and if they are not good, they will be really worse when it's not considered an issue. And I think this is really a violence against women, the fact that we really don't know exactly how many women are victims of violence. And I think this is something that can be acted upon and quickly, demanding, you know, institutes of statistics and etc. And then there's another phenomenon that is much harder to deal with, that is embedded in identity building, and it has to do with cultural and or religious values. And we all know that it's much, much slower to change beliefs and culture than to start a legislation or a new police station, etc. This is something that worries me most, is this, not only the fact that culture is very slow to change, but that in the same society you do have different cultural perspectives toward what is violence against women, towards what is violence in general, and how should you act on that. What I want to say is that crime and order, order and disorder, this is historical. It's dated, and it's not necessarily homogeneous on a society nor unanimous. You might have a society that you have different perceptions, social perceptions, that might or might not be ascribed in legislations or practices of what is violence against women. So you might be on the same country at the same moment, a certain region that accepts a certain amount of violence because they don't consider it as violence. And that's very dangerous. That I think is very dangerous. It is exactly to build on a country a certain culture that will be consensual. I don't mean unanimous, but consensual, or that certain issues, certain behaviors, certain attitudes are violent, and then there's a distance between what is seen as a violence, what is criminalized, and what is punished. And this is political. This distance is political. We see this so clearly in relation to the cases of women who are murdered by their lovers, their spouses, anyway, the so-called crimes of passion. And if the woman, she had been murdered by a man on the street, she doesn't know, it has one treatment. But when it comes to this domestic cycle, in certain societies it's totally accepted, the issue of honor killing. In other societies, the man will argue that the woman was having an affair, she was being unfaithful, she was doing this and that, and then there is this loop that the victim becomes the accused, and in many cases these men are acquitted or receive ridiculous sentences because this violence is accepted. Nobody discussed that murder is violence, maybe the worst kind of violence, take the life of someone. Nobody discussed. Okay, it's a criminal behavior? Depends. Will it be punished? It still depends. So this is something also that worries me a lot. How do we bring together, you know, something that is perceived as a crime, it is criminalized by the laws, etc., and then it's punished by the judicial system. This distance is still very flexible in many countries, and it worries me very much.
This may seem like an odd question to ask you, but you've been working on behalf of women's rights for many, many years. Why are you so passionate, and why do you feel that this is so important?
Well, I think out of love, not out of hate, not out of a sense that society owes me something, but I have received a lot in my life. I was born to a family that was very liberal, very progressive, with a deep sense of social justice, and that's the environment I was brought up with. Also, my father had always give incentives to me, my sisters, that we should study, we should go to the university, should not depend on a man. And so it's not that it lacks something, but when I see that so many women do not have what I've had, do not have the chance, not even the possibility to have a relationship of love with a man, but so many women have relationships that are permeated by hate, by anger, and that they feel so devaluated. Maybe because I feel I'm valuable, I want everybody to feel they are valuable, to have self-esteem, and to believe in the world and believe in themselves. So maybe that's what brought me, but there's always a mystery on life, so then there are things, fortunately, we don't know exactly.
Well, I think in some senses you've answered this question, but let me just say that this course may be attended by many, many people around the world, students and people of all ages. What advice do you have for them about making the world a better place?
Well, this is making the world a better place. It's a difficult task, but I think that we can do it from very, very small attitudes towards the person next to you, be the person, whoever that person is. To be involved in something that transcends the daily life, the daily life of just, having a career, which is very good. Everybody wants to have a career, acquire knowledges, be successful. Those are all very important values. But there is something that I think that activism for a cause gives you, which is this sense of transcendency. I don't know if you have this word in English. Transcendency, the sense that you are part of history, that you are a little drop in history towards an end that would be more positive. And that you might do in so many different circumstances. You might do by joining big politics, but you might also do by being an activist in civil society, by sharing a cause, but it's giving something of yourself to a cause that is not necessarily your own individual trajectory, but bring others to that. In my case, I was very much involved with women's issues, because I could see how while talking about democracy, while talking about equality, women were not part of that conversation. But there are many other causes also that transcend the only individual look at life, and I think this brings more fulfillment and happiness to the person who adopts this attitude.
Thank you so much for
Okay.
being with us.